Good day, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the SOFTRAX Executive Webcast. My name is Wayne, and I will be your coordinator for today. At this time, all participants are in listen-only mode. If at any time during this call you require assistance, please press star followed by 0, and a coordinator will be happy to assist you. I would now like to turn the presentation over to your host for today's call, President and CEO of SOFTRAX, Mr. Bob O'Connor. You may proceed, sir.
Thank you very much, Wayne, and welcome to everyone to today's webcast. We're delighted to have you. SOFTRAX, as you may know, is the leading provider of revenue management solutions to hundreds of companies all over the globe. And we have more than hundreds of people registered for today's webcast, which indicates how much people want to hear from Dr. Richard Moore, that people in the Oracle user community want to hear about this particular topic from Richard. Richard is the Director of Revenue Management Solutions at SOFTRAX. He's backed by popular demand to make his presentation entitled Managing Revenue in Concert with Oracle Financials. And before we begin, I want to thank the Oracle Applications User Group for this opportunity to spend some time with you today. And as always, Rich will be available for questions at the end of his prepared remarks. Let me just take you quickly through some housekeeping matters. I'll spend a few minutes on SOFTRAX and how we fit into today's topic, and then I'll turn the meeting over to Richard, who will share his presentation as outlined on the screen in front of you. For those of you who are unfamiliar with our webcast format, we do leave some time for you to ask questions at the conclusion of Rich's presentation, and all of this will be done before or by the top of the hour. To ask questions, please look at your screen and look for the Ask a Question console. You can click on that at any time and type in a question, and I'll either interrupt Rich or, more likely, we'll ask Rich at the end of his prepared remarks, as I said. The most commonly asked question is, how do I get a copy of the slides? Or can I get a copy of the slides? And the answer is yes, so we do make you work a little bit for that. And at the end of the presentation, your screen will be turned and directed to a browser where we would like a short online survey completed. As a result of that, you'll be able to get copies of the slides as well as a link for an on-demand copy of the broadcast. So just a quick commercial, if I could. For those of you who would like to meet us in person, as you'd expect, being so entrenched in the Oracle user community, we will be at Oracle Open World next week in San Francisco, booth 230. Rich also will be making a presentation on next Tuesday at 2 o'clock, and you can see that in the program there, and you can see all the links that are there. So if you happen to be in Oracle World next week, please drop by, and we'd love to spend some time with you in person in addition to the webcast. So as I said, let me just take a few minutes in terms of giving you an intro in terms of SOFTRAX and what we're doing on this end of things. We are an enterprise software company that manages all aspects of a company's revenue cycle. As I said earlier, we have several hundred customers across many different industries, all of whom use our software to manage their revenue recognition, complex revenue allocation, reporting, forecasting, and so forth. And our applications and their unique functionality are delivered in really two revenue management solutions. Now, the first on your screen is a complete billing and revenue management applications for various industries as listed on your screen. And Rich will spend more time on the second offering today that has been designed for companies who have employed or deployed a ERP system, in this case Oracle. And Rich will talk about how our application called Revenue Manager works within your Oracle environment. Our applications are closely aligned with the needs of the CFO and financial executives in many different ways. This is just an overview. The first 2 points really deal with compliance-related issues, whether they're providing robust internal controls or replacing error-prone spreadsheets or custom systems that don't scale and don't have the capabilities of a product developed application. In terms of the audit, making sure of documentation issues and making sure of consistency of application of revenue policies across global companies. And the third issue here is really of a strategic benefit, really creating enormous value for the executives in terms of visibility to revenue backlog and revenue forecasts and understanding the differences between booking sales and revenue on an ongoing basis. Many studies have been conducted by IDC and RevenueRecognition.com, and I encourage you to take a look at these studies, and there's a few data points from them. We still see a great majority of companies, as a result of the study, using spreadsheets for critical information information around revenue, which leads to many material weaknesses, compliance issues, as well as scalability issues. And the reasons that we see such widespread manual use is reflected in many other studies. They include the fact that revenue management is so very complex, revenue recognition around different business models with transaction types and volumes of data all create a great deal of complexity and difficulty in terms of managing and creating internal controls. There's certainly a large gap in the ERP systems in terms of managing revenue, and we are here to fill that gap. And the impact in terms of using spreadsheets or manual systems, obviously a very high compliance and restatement risk of errors, and the ability or inability, I should say, to close on time, whereby 57% of public companies said they couldn't finalize their revenue numbers within the desired close process due to the complexity of the transactions and unavailable information, and also the fact that many companies are making assumptions around revenue and not using the actual numbers. And again, I encourage you to visit revenuerecognition.com and for the details of these studies, which these screens you can't see the details of, but certainly they're all available. The full studies are there for your review. And lastly, in another study, this one done by Audit Analytics, it was found that revenue recognition restatements wipe out an average of 10% of a company's market value, and this is based on about 600 companies over the past couple of years who've had to restate their financial information and most importantly, revenue. So our mission and the mission of this product revenue manager is really to close the critical compliance and performance gaps, to make sure that we're supporting the internal controls from your financial performance and financial compliance perspective, helping you manage your business performance and get a great deal of more information from your system with respect to visibility and decision support. So I think that concludes my prepared remarks. I want to introduce Richard Moore. Richard currently serves as the Director of Revenue Management Solutions at SOFTRAX, and he has really consulted with hundreds and hundreds of companies and the senior executives in those companies on revenue recognition, accounting, forecasting, and all things revenue. He is really a foremost authority on revenue and revenue recognition issues, and is among the best anywhere in terms of translating complex revenue models into automated systems. He has very deep industry expertise and engaging personality, which is why our customers and employees think so highly of Rich. So it's a pleasure, Rich, to have you on again, and welcome, and the show is yours.
Thank you very much, Bob. Appreciate everybody being attended today on this webcast. It's always a pleasure. Each time I give this, we always get some different questions, some different flavor. We try to carry that on to the next problem. What I'd like to do today is talk about really the process by which we've taken to kind of look at Oracle and look at the things that we could provide and how our solution really fits in with that. We have different groups on the webcast who are listening in, some from the IT organization, some from the accounting organization. So I want to really try to bring that together. So hopefully this will give both sides a really good view of what the problem is, how we approach it, and what the technology is behind it. And so I'm going to talk about the problem, really frame where it came from, talk about how we kind of approach it from our component level, look at the types of revenue problems that are existing, and I picked 4 of them that stand out just because they're very frequently, we run into them very frequently. It's only a portion, I'd say, of what we address, but I think they'll resonate with everybody in the audience. I want to talk about the integration and the integration technology and the approach to that, try and weave that in at the same time. Look at some of the reporting, because ultimately we see revenue, like many of the executives out there, as really the end result is really what the information can provide, and looking at revenue really gives you great insight into your business. And although there's the compliance aspect, which is incredibly important, and Bob mentioned that, is that, that's a fundamental. What revenue really tells you is a lot more about your business, and getting the data out and being able to consume it, look at it, and make decisions based off it is really the end goal from our perspective, and we try to spend a lot of time there. So when we talk about a solution, we talk about a solution that really has that scalability and visibility going forward. So that's kind of what I want to do with that. I'm going to start with something that's familiar to everybody, which is the traditional order-to-cash cycle. And this is most frequently what we are looking at with an Oracle solution. And I think those of you who've been involved and look at the order-to-cash cycle, we've greatly simplified it here. We have solutions that do the same, and I think that just epitomizes what the problem is. There's a tremendous amount of effort on the order-to-cash side to basically make it work. And there's a lot of complexities around it, and there's a lot of challenges. And because the order-to-cash cycle has really been prevalent since probably the 80s, actually. I was reading a book recently about Solomon software, which came into being back then. What you've seen is the order-to-cash cycle has been improved. It's very complicated. People have really gone through a lot of trouble. And Oracle's done a phenomenal job with, I think, R12, or providing the tools to really make the order-to-cash cycle work well. That complexity actually exists on the revenue side as well. And so if you think the revenue side is simple, you look at the order-to-cash side and say, we've got exactly the same parallel universe working on the order-to-revenue side. Why did we end up there? And we ended up there quite simply because when things started back in the 80s, SOP 81.1 came about, which really looked at the services industry and said, the picture of cash doesn't really tell us much about the business. We're getting cash ahead of time. We really want a good idea of how the project's going. How can we basically report that better? And 81.1 came with all of the completed contracts, looking at sometimes costs, looking at percentage of completion. And that gave you that perspective of revenue being different from cash and receivables. That was very important. It was the first break, really. And that created a whole set of work in order to make that comply. And then in the 90s, there was a different aspect which said, not only do we have to worry about the timing of the revenue relative to the receivables side, we have to worry about the allocation of revenue. And we have to worry about the fact that we're selling bundled products, and we have to unbundle them so that we can recognize the maintenance over time. It applied to lots of software companies. That was very much in focus. And obviously that added a new complexity. Now we're not only spreading the revenue, we're worrying about timing of the revenue. And meanwhile, the order-to-cash cycle is now getting further apart from this. SAB 104 came across, and we started to talk about whether software and other components was really necessary. Did it introduce, was it perfunctory? And that introduced that guidance. And now we have to make decisions around the treatment. We couldn't just say because there was software in there. So now we've got this revenue management decision tree that's building up. We have to allocate. We have to spread it. And then 0021 came along from an accounting guidance that everybody knows is in the accounting world, and probably many people from the IT world have worked on this, that basically said we have to start to look at these arrangements. We have to start to look at our overall interactions with customers and basically define these arrangements, all in the hope of being able to provide a better visibility into really what was going on. And although it was a guidance, the real interest was to provide investors with really great visibility into that. Now, of course, the problem with a guidance like that was that these things came along over time, and generally this is what we saw in the order-to-revenue cycle and still do see. We see a lot of effort has gone into being able to put these things in, take care of milestones, and handling deferred revenue, doing the analysis. Some systems heavily reliant on spreadsheets. Other people have built very heavily custom systems. And then, of course, when you go to do an upgrade, for example, from R11 to R12, you raise the question again, do we really want to go through that? Oracle adds some functionality to their billing side. They can handle a lot more things that way. Do we really want to go forward with that? And it's a problem. It's a great complexity that's occurred over time. That, of course, is being the goal of our SOFTRAX Revenue Manager solution. So that kind of frames that problem really exists out there. We see the parallel universe in order to revenue that we've done now for kind of 12 years probably when we first started to really drive this, and with this product over the last few years. And we wanted to create within the Oracle ecosystem the ability to do revenue management just as well as you could do order to cash. So there was a few things that were very important in that regard. First of all, we recognized that we needed a lot of functionality, and we built that over time. We understood that from our other products that we developed. We wanted to eliminate the reliance on products that are difficult to audit as much as anything, difficult to have compliance with. The target was to make it work within these, the SAP ecosystem, the Oracle ecosystem, and others. And we were fortunate enough that at this time, all of the major vendors had opened up their architecture, and they'd opened it up with basically the BPOL orchestration, Oracle Fusion effectively with its BPOL Process Manager, its Enterprise Service Bus. All of these things basically allowed us to develop an application that would work in conjunction with the other modules that Oracle provided. And in looking at that a little more closely, I'm going to get into the details of the integration a little more later, but fundamentally, this is a services application. So these services become available, all the functionality becomes available within the Oracle Fusion environment. It's exactly the way it's supposed to be. As we've heard many times, the advent of SOA, it's exactly what it's all about, is that you can make this play within this framework, and that takes a huge burden away. Still a lot of work, obviously, anytime you're building applications within the framework, but it's all within the Oracle Fusion environment. It's all services-oriented architecture. The Oracle database is driving it, of course, which, of course, is very good on the scalability side. And then we have the ability to really take advantage of the Oracle set of books and account structure. One of the things we liked was the whole concept behind flex fields and the accounting side of Oracle. So that hadn't really worked. So let's get back and look at the problem here. So we have this revenue manager, and then within the box that says revenue manager, I want to focus on four major things that cannot be managed well within the Oracle environment. And again, this is just a portion of what we run into, but they should be familiar. I'm going to go through each one of these and show how we address these. First of all, we've got the concept of a multiple element arrangement, and there is a thread, a story actually, as you go each one. The concept of fair value, revenue recognition checklist, and then these add-on follow-on transactions. These are all handled and can be handled within Revenue Manager very easily. At the core of the SOFTRAX Revenue Manager, though, is this revenue item. We're going to talk about the revenue item. And the information from Oracle essentially is getting passed through the service bus, and that's how information is going to exchange into it. So basically, information that's within Oracle is being exchanged with these entities inside the SOFTRAX Revenue Manager that you can define. So that's obviously a very key part. Now, why did I pick these processes or these boxes? Because they are the challenging revenue processes. And what I mean by that is we'll look at each one of them. Multiple element arrangements, what's the problem? The problem is that the transactional flow that you're typically trying to do from an order to cash cycle means that these transactions really need to be grouped together in terms of defining an arrangement by which they're related in some way. They're related by the guidance. They can be related by the way the revenue manager or contract manager interprets the contract. A lot of flexibility needed. It's totally independent of what's going on in the invoicing side of things. Fair value, the concept that we have to assign a correct value to something we're selling. And even if we discount it or give it away for free, which occasionally occurs, that we need to be able to put some value on it in order to record it correctly. And if you think about it, it makes perfect sense. It's kind of like my kids. they have to understand value. Value is very important. Revenue recognition checklist. How do you figure out what to do? We've already said this guidance came in and said sometimes you have to include it, sometimes you don't. There's a checklist behind it. And then these follow-on transactions. What happens when you get additional actions taking care of the revenue lifecycle, as simple as maintenance renewals or subscription renewals or subscription updates? Often the cash side is fairly complicated, but the revenue side equally is challenging in that regard. So we're going to look at the first one. First one going in is this multiple element arrangement. again, multiple element arrangement is the need to define a set of transactions or information that is part of an arrangement. And then this arrangement needs to be able to respond to a series of events. It also needs to be able to pull information in at any time to define it. So you've got this group of related revenue that you want to operate on maybe as a whole. So for example, you may want to defer everything in the arrangement because of some clause in the contract. So you want to be able to operate at what we call the group level, which is the multiple element arrangement level. Now, in the next slide, we're going to look at this and say, okay, this is the first part. We're going to pull information in from Oracle. We're going to pull in from various entities which define what the arrangement could be. One of the first things that we're probably going to do is, this isn't true all the time, but let's assume it's coming in from Oracle's order management system. We're going to get a sales order in with a set of line items. And the first part of this is to say, what's the equivalent to a order line item effectively when it first comes in? Well, this is where we define these revenue items. You can think of a revenue item as basically what you've managed today. It's a revenue associated with the transaction. From an accounting point of view, it's an element of accounting or a deliverable. And what that means is that even though you may get a line item in, you may actually create additional revenue items because you've associated additional deliverables or elements of accounting with that sales order. So it's not exact. It doesn't have to be a one-to-one relationship with an invoice line item or a sales order line item. That concept of it being able to break out and refer into a deliverable. And you can see on the screen, it's basically everything you expect revenue to have. It's got a forecast associated with it. It's got accounts associated with it. It's got a time frame. It's got amounts. It's got it knows how to recognize revenue. So this revenue item is a core piece of really the element you're working with. And then we take these revenue items, as basically the information comes across from Oracle, and we have to relate them to the arrangement. And the arrangement can be driven from a whole bunch of things. This is typical. We may see it come from Oracle contracts in the master agreement or from contract system. We see it come from that place, a lot of different places. It might come from Oracle projects or some other project system because there's a statement of work involved. It comes from the Oracle order management system, Oracle AR, or maybe some other billing system, and then the purchase order system. So in order to define whether something's an arrangement, we may need to pull in information or access information from any one of those entities that exist in the Oracle ecosystem. There's not really anything very similar to order-to-cash structure. Maybe sites a little bit is involved. But the whole goal here is that you can bring this together and form the arrangement. The impressive thing is that when we work with accounting groups, it's amazing how we can implement a set of rules that can define what an arrangement is. And so it can be automated in some cases. It can be semi-automated where there's a review process. But essentially, we can bring in the information to form this arrangement. So now these revenue items become associated with the multi-element arrangement group within Revenue Manager. That gives the Revenue Manager a place to manage them effectively. And like I said, they can operate on them. They can select a few. They can defer them. They can put conditions, which we'll get to. But that's a basic construct that's in the system, and it's kind of very powerful. So that's the kind of the first play, if you want, is to create this multiple element arrangement. That's all good. So, and in some cases, that's all you need. Contracts is doing contract accounting. You bring in services in. We've got this kind of grouping, this way to aggregate the information together. But the second complexity that often comes into the revenue side is the fair value side, BSOE management. And why does that play a role? Well, because even though we've got this collection of revenue items now, which is the revenue that we need to manage within the system, we need to allocate the appropriate value to these based on the rules laid out in GAAP, or even if you look at the international standards, there's still this implication that we need to understand this concept of value. And so if we go back to our nice slide here, we'll see that we've got our multiple element arrangement. We've now goal is revenue. Now we have to manage the value associated with it. Managing value is important, and that may sound like a trivial thing to say, companies are really working towards this. It's a continuous process, really, of establishing that you have the correct value associated with the revenue, applying and validating. It's a constant thing. It can be allocated based on a range, and I'll just talk about that in a second. And the actual calculation of the value may depend on timing. That's a part in terms of when you deliver certain things. But if you think about this whole value construct, it's extremely important to know, particularly at the end of a quarter. So many of our customers now are looking at the issue of monitoring what their value is towards the end of a quarter, because they don't want, they've established a value. They want to try and maintain that value, and they will look at the discounting. And as at the end of a quarter, certainly discounts go up. So this fair value is a kind of one at times a real-time exercise that's actually occurring. If we look at what this really means, is that when you allocate within a range, typically, that if the value that you calculate for allocation falls within a range, then you book it against the sales order value. Very trivial rule, something that is completely automated within our system, as there are many other things associated with fair value. And of course, as you'd expect, if something's outside the range, and it's booked at that amount. So these are some of the rules that you have to consider. And so once you've pushed it out, there's this whole fair value calculation allocation thing that effectively is services that can be tied together completely within Infusion, independent of the order-to-cash cycle. So the non-invasiveness of implementing the system is pretty important because, like I said earlier, you really want the order-to-cash system to really be tuned for that. You don't want to be going in and trying to make it do revenue as well and put in additional entities and line items on the order just to capture revenue, which is unfortunately what we see a lot of. In addition, on the fair value side, we also look at what's needed there, and you can establish value in different regions is very common. So you can basically establish value on any flex field, for want of a better phrase, any field within the system. Just like you would establish a pricing configurator, you can establish a fair value configurator that essentially allows you to basically follow rules for a particular region, etc. Now, because this is of such interest, this is a good place for us to talk about really what the next part of the whole fair value management is the ability to see the audit trail associated with it. And behind one of the things that is incredibly important is understanding basically what the revenue treatment was, what happened during the allocation, how much got allocated to where and what. And so built within the system is outside of the Oracle environment, but part of the Oracle environment is this whole idea of a very detailed compliance log to help with the audit side of things, the compliance side of things. But it gives you more this kind of revenue life cycle that you can view. So those are our first two things that we've done so far. We've said, okay, we can group. Now we can let the Oracle order-to-cash system flow. We can take information out, bring it in, create it into a multiple element group. Do the allocation now based on the fair value that we've associated with. We may start with the master, the product master, but we're going to assign certain value and bring that into the system. So
Rich, before you run off to the third item here, I just want to remind our audience that please feel free at any time to ask a question. Look on your screen, and there's an Ask a Question button. Click on that, and I'm reading the questions as Rich makes his presentation, and we'll ask him at the end of his prepared remarks. So please feel free to do that at any time. I thought I'd also give you a little break there, too, Rich. So. All right, back to you now.
Thank you, Bob. So we've kind of talked about. So now we've got this nice revenue. We've got it organized in the system. The revenue manager can now operate within our environment, within the UI that you've seen some screenshots of to manage the revenue, group it together, do the allocation, know what they've done, pull all that part out. Let's talk about the next challenge box. The next challenge box is the revenue recognition checklist. So business is an interesting thing. There are all sorts of timing issues that occur. Things change all the time. And when a contract comes into the system or a sales order or a transaction, there's the need to determine what that treatment is and whether we need to apply certain conditions on the recognition of revenue. No surprise there. If we look at our next piece here, we'll see that as we go along the box here, we've got these revenue items now that need to be able to respond to different treatments. They need to go down different pathways, different decision trees. A large part of this information exists within the Oracle systems. We can imagine that there's contract and order information that's going to be necessary to make that decision making. Fulfillment, target dates, as well as the actual dates when they occur. We may have things like extended payment terms coming from the billing side of things. And we need to determine whether these extended payment terms are outside the norm. Are they things that would cause revenue to be a concern? Do we have to worry about the creditworthiness and the collectability of the customers? So you can see there's a lot of things that contribute that are information that exists in different places within the Oracle structure. And by pulling this information in, we're going to drive our decision tree both at the beginning of the cycle and throughout the end of the cycle. And, of course, we'll talk about that technology piece later. Let's look at the checklist. Most companies we talk to have a checklist, something they've worked with the auditors on, something that they've established as a guide to their basically taking their revenue policy down. Here's one of the great things from our perspective. I mentioned order to cash quite a bit. The order to cash, you have a lot of ways you can do stuff, pretty much your imagination. The order to revenue side has some very strict guidance associated with it. So even though the checklists we see are unique to you as a customer, they are, in fact, we see many similarities going from customer to customer to customer. We're all looking for the same things. And they come in different ways and different guises, but fundamentally there is the need to meet the 4 criteria of RevRec and look at these conditions that are out there, extended payment terms, proof of delivery, et cetera, et cetera. Here's an example of a pretty good one where you may actually, depending on the transaction, different region of the world, the transaction may come in and the treatment might be based on, do we have any implicit deliverables, any implied deliverables in there? A good one is also PCS, which often in countries like Japan and Asia is bundled in with the solution, where here it may be broken out in the U.S. and other parts of the world. And so based on the checklist, the treatment of those is different. And this can be fully, it can be fully systematized. Amazing, again. The tree itself is already known to you and the accounting departments. You've already gone through. You go through it every day when you interpret complex contracts. And these parameters drive revenue. So a checklist is going to determine whether we have to create a multiple element arrangement, whether we apply VSOE in this particular case. And so we've built this framework so far. Now we're adding more information to the decision process of whether we're going to recognize that revenue and when we're going to recognize that revenue. The checklist can be part of any system. For example, we've just highlighted here, if something has liquidated damages, that might be part of the contract, and that might be something to check off or put in what those damages are. And you'll notice I've highlighted here that a lot of times you might actually carve out something because of the checklist, like damages or marketing fees or whatever. And you have to maintain this parent-child relationship between the systems. So you can always relate back as to the orders, why that was done, how it was carved out. Very powerful feature, allows you to put the revenue selectively on hold pending certain things occurring, so certain contingencies. And you can apply that across the entire arrangement, or you could apply it just to certain types of products within the arrangement. Probably a good example of that is the whole idea behind an undelivered element, where you have things that maybe you've promised to the customer, or a non-QA product which is in the future. And again, all these conditions have to be satisfied. Some of them may come from contract interpretation that's done directly through the SOFTRAX Revenue Manager by the revenue manager, by the revenue accountant, because they've read the contract. Other ones may come from the order management system, like the proof of delivery or fulfillment system. So all of these conditions have to be met in order for revenue to be recognized. And and this information is kind of, if you want, globally available. So we know what information is available inside the Oracle infrastructure. We know what information is available in our system. There may be additional information that gets passed in because it's captured in the early part of the system that can be pulled in, or it may be entered through our system. What we do know is always what information that is. When we look at what that kind of looks like, you can see that we can add these many, many revenue conditions or contingencies to these revenue items to affect the timing of delivery, of recognition rather. It can be based on delivery. And again, by being able to perform these groups, like the multiple element arrangement group, we've got the capacity to be able to apply, once we get a message on the enterprise server bus, we can apply that condition to everything. So for example, shipment of an upgrade may be part of the contract. Once we get notification of that, that can then be applied to every revenue item which may have revenue item on hold because of that. And then it propagates through the system. In fact, we have one customer that's propagated like 70,000 upgrades at one time for $0 based on the fact that they shipped a $0 upgrade, no billing involved, and it would then relieve that revenue associated with that 70,000 orders which had an upgrade on it. So very, very powerful stuff. Pretty exciting in terms of now building this great picture. Now, hopefully you can see that by doing this, now the visibility into your revenue is getting pretty intense, which is why we've got the section on reporting. Let's talk quickly about follow-on transactions. These are things that occur during the life cycle based on changes. It happens all the time. We will look at our picture again. As you can see, you can imagine how an order coming into the system is predicated by a previous order coming into the system. Good example of this is anything that basically adjusts the original terms, credits, rebuilds, upgrades, cancellation, renewals, you name it, you've got it, we know it. They give the revenue manager a headache every time they're done. They bring in extra revenue, which makes everybody happy. So even though it's a headache, it's a happy headache. And this is a kind of one of these great things in terms of the revenue life cycle, is that you really are getting into the ability to see kind of trends, etc. Now, it's often complicated because sometimes there's an adjustment around amount. It's based on billing. It has nothing to do with the adjustment on revenue. So that is a huge issue. And that's taken very nicely because we've separated the two out. By separating the two out, billing occurs. We can adjust the revenue independently of that. A late subscription renewal is a perfect example of where you've got things happening after the original order. Sometimes you have to wait to get the renewal in. You may have already booked it at one rate, but a negotiation occurred, and now you find out it's a different rate, and you're making adjustments. Co-terminating. All the accountants hopefully out there are nodding because they know they're paying, and they have to address this. This is what makes it very difficult. So it's part of the complication of the process that we feel that we've got a great handle on how we address that. In fact, there's the things that you can do. We offer tremendous capability to manage these revenue items through the system. You can manipulate them, you can merge them, you can carve them, you can put them on hold, you can do all the things that you'd like to do to revenue through the interface. And one of the great things about the interface is the interface is talking to a web services architecture behind it. So as part of the integration, you can actually walk through a transaction and be able to capture what the associated SOA framework or web services workflow behind it, people workflow behind the person walking through the interface. And in fact, when we demonstrate the product, we typically walk through the demonstration. That gives us the services, and then we can show a fully automated system. So even the interface is based on a services-oriented architecture, which is quite unique but very powerful in order to take transactions from being manual to fully automated. And lots of capability basically available. Okay, we're going to switch now. So first a quick summary. We've looked at 4 areas. They kind of related in the sense that we had an arrangement, we apply fair value, we drive certain conditions in the fair value, we worry about the add-on transactions being able to relate back. So an add-on transaction might be related to a multiple element arrangement. Those are four very common processes that exist throughout all industries who are concerned with any type of deferral of revenue. And we can typically go in and discuss those. There's many others that we could discuss, but I picked those, I think, because they show the breadth of the problem and also show kind of how we do it. So now let's talk about the integration considerations of what this really looks like for a more technical level. So we're pulling this information into the revenue manager, which really means we're executing certain web services in our system. We're creating certain entities like the revenue item. We're managing those, and then we're pushing information back. This is just a kind of an overview slide, if you want, that essentially and it doesn't really look like this in a sense because you've got the message bus. You've got this enterprise message bus to exchange information back and forward. So it's not really this kind of static, blocky picture. But you can understand that we can pull in the information on the left-hand side, and we're going to talk about how we do that in a second, to create the information we need to define arrangements, to define recognition events, to define what these revenue items are, to understand when we get an invoice what the impact of that invoice is, and how we bring this all together into kind of this subsidiary ledger. So this is overall integration strategy. There are two ways we've typically seen the integration work. There is still, I think, the traditional way of using a staging table to push information that we need onto a staging table that's pulled off. The key here is we're pulling it off using our BPOL integration router. We're still using our services to bring the data into the system and to manipulate and utilize and create all the forecasts, etc. And it's still running through what these revenue treatments are in the center. And these revenue treatments are your process flows. They're literally kind of taking your Visio diagrams of your revenue treatments and putting them into the system, and then having the data drive those particular revenue treatments based on what the data attributes are. So there's a staging table method, and we certainly see a lot of that, but it wouldn't be exciting if I didn't talk about going through the message bus. The key here is it looks very much the same, and it's supposed to, because we're going through a lot of implementations where there's a migration strategy to some type of enterprise service bus. They may be on 11, maybe using staging tables is appropriate as the best place to start to solve this problem. But as you go forward and implement a full SOA architecture, then you don't want the revenue side to change. Revenue treatments are the same, no matter how you get the data in there. The revenue flow is the same. The journal entries are the same. So this is key. Is it really doesn't matter to us. The orchestration inside within Revenue Manager should be agnostic to what tool it is to access the data. Clearly, a message bus gives you a lot of capabilities to send data in at any time during the life cycle, respond to it, slightly different behavior. But the point here is that the goal is to make the revenue treatments or the orchestration. That's constant. And so that doesn't really matter from our perspective if you have a full Oracle implementation or you have parts of it that use other systems. We know that the revenue treatment is going to be constant. So, that's our basic kind of fundamental goal, is to base the integration on it, no matter what you have, on a services-oriented architecture, because the BPOL workflow environment gives you your revenue treatment environment, which is fundamental to correctly managing revenue. Now, I'm going to talk about the revenue reporting next, because what we've talked about a little bit is the mechanics of revenue, which is something I always talk about. What are the mechanics of RevRec? And the mechanics of RevRec are getting everything right, and we've kind of talked about how that would work. But fundamentally, we're talking about this revenue management as revenue treatment, as being able to really look at the revenue and understand what we've got going on in there. From an accounting point of view, we actually try to look at revenue as soon as it comes into the system. Now, we'll forget about quote forecasting for a second. That's a whole separate topic. But let's consider that when you first sign a contract, or you sign a contract with a customer for the first time, that in our world represents potential revenue. And we record that as a journal entry into what we call unbilled deferred revenue, which is the top left-hand corner. Here's the interesting thing historically about this. This concept and implementation came before the revenue management product. It came from the development of our billing products, where it was the same thing. You needed to have that visibility into the potential revenue when you first got into a contract deal. And so in developing that product, we realized the need for this potential revenue visibility. Two things happen then over time. You either earn revenue, in which case the revenue is booked to the right into the earned account, or you bill, in which case it can be billed deferred. Sometimes it's at the same time, in which case you'd end up with the earned billed in the bottom right-hand corner. Sometimes it's at different times. The point here is by recording this journal entry detail, we have tremendous visibility into revenue backlog, and we see the revenue as soon as it hits the system. Many of the customizations out there that we've seen with the Oracle environment really don't get visibility into revenue until the invoicing occurs, which puts tremendous limitations on some of the complex billing, and is why we see so many things still manually done. So this is a fundamental piece of the whole reporting, is we can get at this potential revenue in the system, which is this unbilled side of things, and see how it flows. We can see what's holding it up. In some cases, billing's tied to revenue, so we can see the revenue being held up within the system because it's got a billing condition associated with it. So very powerful idea to have this, what we call a 6-account problem. It's really where it is, and it's from a strong journal entry creation point of view. Now, we typically don't push, or most companies don't want to push the unbilled deferred into the GL. Most people will push the unbilled earned as part of revenue. So we typically have the detail, which is very powerful, and then it doesn't get pushed to the ledger, so it's not even visible from the general ledger side. And that's an important distinction to make. This gives us unprecedented ability to really look at the breakout of where information is. We can pull this data into a business intelligence environment, and therefore you can kind of get it and do all the things you'd like to do. Here we've kind of got a simple bar chart showing the deferred revenue unbilled DR into different quarters for maybe a division, etc. And then we can also, because we've taken this out now into our business intelligence environment, now we can take advantage of all of the attributes associated with revenue. So, for example, channel distribution is a huge factor in terms of understanding the different revenue, because often different revenue rules apply when applied to different channels. We can then look at that and break out the information quite nicely. So here's another view which has a end-user reseller, and you can see, if you're familiar with BI applications, the ability to drag and drop and drill down and look at revenue a totally different way. We may want to go in and examine revenue based on the status of the revenue. What conditions are holding revenue up? So now I'm going to talk about managing revenue. We've got the mechanics in there. That takes care of itself. We've got to get the data right. But once you've got the data, you can do tremendous things with it and really get an understanding of the relationship between where your revenue is, which is often related to the work you have to do. I mean, that's a key. Revenue just doesn't sit aside. Revenue is a pretty good indicator that you have future implications over time. And in order to recognize that revenue, you better get that work done. So even though you've got the cash. And that's something that's often forgotten in where revenue has an implication on business. So this gives you ability to drill down, look at what's holding up revenue, and then look more into the forecast. Look at what's being booked, what's available as forecasted revenue going out in the future based on certain conditions. So here's some nice drill down reports that you can get into. But there's other information you need to get. We pulled a couple of other reports that are available within the system just to show you the kind of things that we think are key. Analysis and reporting side, we still have aging. Aging to us is revenue that doesn't get recognized when you think it is. You project revenue out for next year, saying, this is what we expect it to be. If revenue is on hold and doesn't get recognized on its date, it's just the same as receivables. It's age revenue. Great visibility. Every company has some age revenue, even though most of the time they don't realize it. Really good key performance indicator to look at. Similarly, you want to stay on top of your fair value analysis and really be able to look at that easily, quickly, drive it based on multi-parameters, see where you are in kind of real-time analysis of fair value. So very exciting information that you can pull out relative to kind of the whole revenue scheme of things. Last couple of slides here as we wrap up towards the top of the hour. And just kind of to summarize. So when we set out to do this, we realized that there were some things that revenue was very important, and why you needed to have a system that had that kind of scalability and was separated from the rest of what the Oracle system was doing. Because what you needed to do with revenue was very different to what the main focus of the Oracle environment was. Obviously, there's a whole application here associated with governance, risk, and compliance on the revenue side, as well as the rest of the operational model. So you're already doing this throughout the system. Making this part of the Oracle ecosystem puts things together, puts revenue into a managed centralized system, provides the documentation, has key audit processes, is just going to help put the system under control. So that problem can be solved and is just part of the process. If we look at this, what we call the revenue process model, we talk about this is what we're building in these revenue treatments, really taking your revenue policy, taking it down to a process model, being able to drive revenue through this process model, apply the fair value, the checklist, the treatments, all of those things go through it very nicely. When you think about the ROI, I think the mechanics are one thing. Having a system that can really handle all of your revenue in one place and get great visibility into it and give you strategic insight is another. Eliminating the things that cause grief at the end of a close, allowing you to close some parts early, all of these things can have a real tangible ROI. ROI is always an interest in things. It means different things to different people. Everywhere we go, the revenue team wants to contribute to the strategic success of a business, and they want to have this information so they can do that. They know they have to have it. And so the real ROI in the end is making a difference to the top and bottom lines of the business and being able to contribute in that area. And that's really kind of where the rubber meets the road, and it is extremely key. Just closing, appreciate your time to talk about these three major issues. In terms of revenue itself, hopefully I've given you some view as to how these things work together. I'm sure there are questions about more technical stuff as well as more accountant stuff because we were limited to an hour. In thanking you, I'd like to thank you to be here. We have the other site besides SOFTRAX.com. Hopefully you're familiar with the RevenueRecognition.com, which is a great resource for some of this information. Get great contributions, great questions coming in all the time. And with that, again, thank you very much for your time. I'll hand it over to Bob to maybe pose a couple of questions, and we can wrap up the presentation.
Okay, Rich, thank you very much. We do have questions. Thank you, everybody. For those, we'll take it to the top of the hour, and then at that point we'll remind you about how to get copies of the slides and things like that. As you mentioned, Rich, we do have people who are more technically oriented and also more financially oriented, which is obviously the world in which we work. So let me just go back and forth between those questions. Excuse me. So with respect to like environmental questions, Rich, versions of Oracle, dependency on Fusion, what modules of Oracle, a lot of questions around that. Maybe you could just spend a minute or so just talking about versions, modules, and the requirement of Fusion or not.
Oh, absolutely. Of course, we run into various levels of people on different Oracle versions, as well as companies on different modules, billing modules, order systems that aren't part of Oracle, as well, in terms of a create a hybrid. So the first thing is our solution depends upon the people orchestration. It doesn't have to be Oracle Fusion to do the people orchestration, but if you have a strategy to migrate to Fusion, it's a great place to start to implement. We have no dependency on anything outside of our system having to run Fusion or an enterprise service bus. It can fit basically into that environment. So what we basically are able to say is that we're consistent with Oracle's vision of the world in terms of where they're going and the tools they provide. Revenue Manager is a great way to implement and those tools as a starting place. It doesn't matter if the rest of the environment is on an earlier version of Oracle or not. In fact, the thing we know, though, is if you're already managing revenue, you're already pulling revenue out of the Oracle system, whatever it is, whatever the Oracle environment, infrastructure, whatever that is. And we can pull that information into our system and effectively be agnostic to that. So we're taking advantage of the tools that are available to Oracle, but there's no requirement to upgrade the rest of the system there. But we try to be completely consistent with that. So we can certainly get into more detail if there's questions, and we come out and we talk later about as you go from PeopleSoft, as you go from JD Edwards, and Oracle. So if we think of the whole Oracle family here, right, we're talking about a lot of other systems, and Oracle's laid out a pretty nice relationship there too. So when I talk about Oracle, I really mean the Oracle family. But the great thing is you're not incorporating something that's completely outside of the Oracle tools that are available, both in 11 and 12, et cetera.
All right, great. I think that cleared up for a lot of people. Let's talk about compliance here, Rich, for a little bit. Within the applications, what specifically are we talking about? How we enable compliance, and is the compliance log real time?
Absolutely. The compliance log is real time, and it has a couple of great features. First of all, everything that occurs through the interface or manually gets written to the compliance log. And as a person that likes applications myself, I look at that and say, wow, there's all this great information, and I could certainly get that out in terms of reporting, etc. Some of it's very IT-oriented. It's kind of detailed. It talks about which rules were executed. And that certainly is one side of the compliance. It tells you you can retrace your steps very well. The other side of that is we can add things to the compliance log, which I would refer to as accounting speak. And so as you can insert into these processes, basically you can say this is in compliance with TPA 5100. And that gets written to the compliance log as part of that process. So you can actually create the compliance log, which has accounting speak and IT speak together, and then pull out whatever you need for audit table. Absolutely real time, fully detailed, and gives you that complete history of the revenue life cycle.
All right, great. Certainly you talked about how things change, but if many of our customers have arrangements that continue to change with their customers, how does that happen in terms of the checklist?
Well, the checklist is the checklist in terms of changes is an interesting, is much more complex than what I obviously presented. The checklist is going to have to drive certain behavior, and I hate using the word checklist because checklist implies you check a box and that's the end of it. It's really, the checklist really is the revenue process. So it's an interface really to the revenue process, so that as customers change things, you have to evaluate typically revenue at every level. You might evaluate the checklist, effectively there's checklist items at every level. So you can think there's checklist on the item, there's checklist on the order, there's checklist on the agreement. And so if you have a stated renewal rate as part of the checklist, and it's being governed by that. As the order comes in, it's going to look at the agreement or arrangement, see this stated renewal rate, and use that. So it's very dynamic and much simpler. Fortunately or unfortunately, it's much more process-driven than a simple box. But the hierarchy or the relationship between the different entities is really what drives the checklist. The great thing is every revenue manager we meet knows how to do this. So that's the good news.
All right, great. Well, we're up against the clock here, Rich. Thank you very much for sharing your insight. As always, thank you to the audience for their participation, their questions. I'm sorry we didn't get to many of them. We will follow up with them. I want to remind you, as your screen says now, that Rich and others will be at Oracle World next week, so if you happen to be there, please drop by to continue these conversations. I also want to remind you what I said at the outset of the webcast, to get copies of the slides or a link that has the rebroadcast for this event. Please complete the survey. Again, you should see soon you see now a URL with the survey. We need your feedback. We want your feedback, and that will enable you to get copies of the slides and the rebroadcast. And please stay tuned to your email, revrec.com and SOFTRAX.com, for other executive webcasts. Again, thank you very much, Rich, and thank you, everyone, for your participation. Goodbye.